images before and after the Japanese earthquake and tsunami March 2011, showing the city of Sumo and the surrounding region badly affected by the tsunami.
A large number of highly radioactive isotopes released by the destruction of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant grossly contaminated the Japanese mainland. Most of these radionuclides had short half-lives, which meant they would essentially disappear in a matter of days or months. For many of those who were exposed to them, there will be major health consequences. However, there are some radioactive elements that will not rapidly disappear, and it is these long-lived radionuclides that will remain to negatively affect the health of all complex life forms that are exposed to them. Chief among them is cesium-137, which has taken on special significance because it's proven to be the most abundant of the long-lived radionuclides that has remained in the environment following the nuclear disasters at Chernobyl and Fukushima. It has a 30-year radioactive half-life, which is why it persists in the environment. Scientists now believe that it will be 180 to 320 years before the cesium-137 around the destroyed Chernobyl reactor actually disappears from the environment. Thus, radioactivity is a term which indicates how many radioactive atoms are disintegrating in a time period. We measure the intensity of radioactivity by the rate of disintegrations and the energy they produce. 1 becquerel is equal to 1 atomic disintegration per second. 1 curie is defined as that amount of any radioactive material that will decay at a rate of 37 billion disintegrations per second. So 1 curie equals 37 billion becquerels. It is, in fact, the amount of cesium-137 deposited per square kilometer of land that defines the degree to which an area is classified as being too radioactive to work or live. One may get an idea of the extreme toxicity of cesium-137 by considering how little of it is required to make a large area of land uninhabitable. The lands that were grossly contaminated by the destruction of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant are classified by the number of curies of radiation per square kilometer. There were 3,840 square miles of land contaminated with 15 to 40 curies of radiation per square kilometer. These lands are considered strict radiation dose control zones. The 1,100 square mile uninhabitable exclusion zone that surrounds a destroyed Chernobyl reactor has greater than 40 curies of radioactivity per square kilometer. For those more familiar with square miles, that would be 104 curies per square mile. Central Park in New York City can be made uninhabitable by 2 grams of microparticles of cesium-137. It's now known that the reactors 1, 2, and 3 at Fukushima Daiichi all melted down and melted through the sealed reactor vessels within a few days following the earthquake and tsunami of March 11, 2011. This was not made public by either TEPCO or the Japanese government for 2 months. The greatest amounts of highly radioactive gases were released shortly after the meltdowns, and 80% of this gas released by the reactor is believed to have traveled away from Japan over the Pacific. However, the remaining 20% was dispersed over the Japanese mainland. Note that the images indicate that the plume first went south over Tokyo and then reversed and went north as the wind changed. All the areas where the radioactive gases passed were contaminated. However, the heaviest contamination occurred where rainfall where it rained out. And this accounts for the patchy deposition of the radioactive fallout. 8 months after the disaster, the Japanese Science Ministry released this map. That's the one with the, it would be on your right, which shows that 11,580 square miles, which is 30,000 square kilometers, which represents 13% of the Japanese mainland, had been contaminated with long-lived radioactive cesium. Note that the official map does not note any cesium-137 contamination in the Tokyo metropolitan area, unlike an unofficial survey done about the same time by Professor Yukio Hayakawa of Gunma University. 4,500 square miles, or earlier today we heard 7,700 square miles, which is an area larger than the size of Connecticut, was found to have radiation levels that exceeded Japan's previously allowable exposure rate of 1 millisievert per year. Rather than evacuate this area, Japan chose to raise its acceptable radiation exposure rate by 20 times, from 1 millisievert to 20 millisieverts per year. However, approximately 300 square miles adjacent to the destroyed Fukushima reactors were so contaminated they were declared uninhabitable. 159,000 Japanese were evicted from this radioactive exclusion zone, lost their homes, property, and businesses, and most have received only a small compensation to cover the costs of their living as evacuees. Note here that the criteria used for evacuation is the millisievert. It's not a measured quantity of radiation per unit area that I've described, such as the Curie or Becquerel. Rather, the sievert is a calculated quantity. It's calculated to represent the biological effects of ionizing radiation. In other words, the millisievert is a derived number based on the mathematical models which are used to convert the absorbed dose to effective dose. So what is the increased health risk to Japanese based upon their exposure to 20 millisieverts per year? Let's examine the figures constructed on the basis of data published by the National Academy of Sciences. It was provided to me by Ian Goddard. The vertical y-axis is calibrated to the number of cancer cases per 100,000 age peers. The horizontal x-axis depicts the age of the population beginning at 0 years and moving towards old age. Examine the allegedly safe dose of 20 millisieverts per year. As a result of this exposure, there will be about 1,000 additional cases of cancer in female infants and 500 cases of cancer in infant boys per 100,000 in their age groups. There will be an additional 100 cases of cancer in 30-year-old males in their age groups. Now, notice that children, especially girls, are at most risk from radiation-induced cancer. In fact, female infant has 7 times greater risk, and a 5-year-old girl has 5 times greater risk of getting a radiation-induced cancer than does a 30-year-old man. I want to note here that there's a great deal of controversy in regards to the accuracy of the methods used to arrive at the millisievert measurement, especially in regard to an accurate determination of the biological effects of an external versus internal exposure to ionizing radiation. That is, the effects of an exposure to a source of ionizing radiation that is external to the body versus an exposure that comes from the ingestion of radionuclides that provide a chronic, long-term internal exposure to living cells, which are adjacent to the radioactive atoms or particles.
世界の中で今年間1ミリですよね、それが正しくて日本もそれにとにかく近づけてもらうようにやっぱり世界からのやっぱり働きかけが欲しい、日本はこんな高い線量の中に放っておこうという姿勢を正すためにですね、世界のそういう声が欲しい。
Crippled Fukushima nuclear power plants have revealed radiation levels there 18 times higher than previously thought, a level that can prove lethal within hours.
Today they confirmed contamination high enough to kill workers exposed for a few hours. The discovery of the hotspots is another setback for the plant's owner TEPCO. It's been struggling to prevent more radiation leaking from the Fukushima site since the March 2011 tsunami that sent these 4 reactors into meltdown. Workers are pumping huge volumes of water into the damaged reactor cores to keep them cool. Even after treatment, the water is highly radioactive and is being stored in these temporary tanks where today's contamination was confirmed. How far it could have spread is anyone's guess. On August 20th, TEPCO confirmed at least 300 tons of radioactive water had leaked out of temporary tanks into groundwater below the site. It's also emerged the reactor buildings themselves are leaking contaminated water. It's thought at least some of that radioactive groundwater is flowing straight out into the sea.
Chernobyl was entombed after years of continuous, and I might add, very dangerous effort, reducing the amount of continuously emitted radiation. Chernobyl was, by all estimates, at least until March 11, 2011, the worst nuclear disaster in history. Chernobyl was a single reactor. Fukushima is a collection of 6 nuclear reactors. 5 of them have been destroyed by immediate or late effects of the events of March 11, 2011. 2 of them, reactors numbers 3 and 4, are MOX, or mixed oxides of plutonium reactors. Tokyo Power Company, TEPCO, has stated that it will make no effort to entomb the reactors out of consideration for the dividends of the shareholders, since entombment is a monumentally expensive undertaking. The government of Japan also concurs that TEPCO has no such responsibility, nor apparently does the Japanese government.
It's some 2 years later now, and we don't really know the condition of the reactor core. We don't really know the condition of the containment. The radiation levels are so high inside the containment that it's very difficult to get in there. It will be years before that plant site is cleaned up. The damage that has been experienced at Fukushima is so great and so extensive that I don't think any one utility, certainly TEPCO, has the capability to be able to pay for all of that. So it becomes a national issue.
Internationally, some experts are calling for a task force to intervene and assist Japan with a nuclear mess which will take decades to clean up.
It's the greatest public health hazard the world has ever witnessed, apart from the threat every day of nuclear war. Einstein said the splitting of the atom changed everything save man's mode of thinking. Very profound. Thus we drift towards unparalleled catastrophe.